everybody. Welcome to Phillies Extra, the baseball show from the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm Scott Lauber, and I write about the Phillies in Major League Baseball. And whether you're watching on the Inquirer live page at inquirer.com, YouTube, Facebook, or X, or listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, I have two words for you: pencils down. That's more or less what executives across the sport were told at 6 p.m. Thursday night when the trade deadline came and went. And as usual, it spurred a flurry of action in the hours and days leading up to it. It's amazing, isn't it, what a deadline will do? Especially when it's the last chance to make outside additions to the roster. Back in the day, teams could still trade with each other with waivers after the deadline. Some of the Phillies' biggest swaps during their last sustained run of World Series contention came in the August waiver period. Remember Jamie Moyer in 2006, the Scott Air and Matt Stairs trades in 2008. Well, not anymore. Sure, the Phillies can still call up Justin Crawford to play every day in the outfield or Andrew Painter to join the starting rotation, but this was the last time that they would be able to get help externally until the end of the season. Anyway, Dave Dombrowski doesn't usually sit out a trade deadline, especially when he thinks he has a team that's good enough to win the World Series. And true to form, he struck a whopper of a deal Wednesday night, deadline eve, acquiring closer Jhoan Duran from the Minnesota Twins for two of the Phillies' top six prospects, right-hander Mick Abel, who we had on the show a couple of months ago, and teenage catching prospect Eduardo Tait. And then, on deadline day, a smaller move, also with the Twins, the Phillies getting righty-hitting outfielder Harrison Bader for Double-A outfielder Hendry Mendez and 17-year-old Dominican Summer League righty Jeremy Viloria. Now, we're going to get into both of those moves and the implications of them in a moment. But before I go any further, let me tell you about my guest this week. Because although the trade deadline dominated the news cycle, it is also the Phillies' annual alumni weekend, with more than 50 former players and coaches at Citizens Bank Park, and Jimmy Rollins and Ed Wade going into the team's Wall of Fame on Friday night. And I wanted to mark the occasion by sitting down with someone who played with Rollins and for Wade. I can think of nobody better than former Phillies catcher and 2012 Wall of Fame inductee Mike Lieberthal. As you probably know, Lieberthal was the Phillies' first-round pick in 1990 and the third overall pick in that draft behind Chipper Jones and Tony Clark. He spent 13 seasons with the Phillies from 1994 to 2006, batting .275 with 150 homers, a 788 OPS, and 102 OPS plus. He still holds the franchise record for most homers by a catcher, which is even more impressive when you think of all the great catchers in Phillies history. And nobody, not Bob Boone, not Darren Daulton, not Carlos Ruiz, has caught more games for the Phillies than Lieberthal with 1,139. So I was eager to talk to Mike about longevity behind the plate, especially as it relates to JT Realmuto and the decision the Phillies will face after the season about whether to bring him back. Mainly, though, I wanted to ask about having a front row seat to the formative years of Jimmy Rollins' career and the role that Ed Wade played in laying the groundwork for those Phillies teams that went on to win 5 consecutive division titles, 2 pennants, and 1 World Series. I promise you won't want to miss our conversation, so please stay tuned for that. But I want to do things a little differently, just for this week. Usually I bring in our guest almost right off the top of the show. Instead, I'd like to tie a bow on the trade deadline with a few thoughts. First, let's be clear. The Phillies needed to take a big swing for their bullpen. And in Jhoan Duran, they got the best available reliever based strictly on his stuff and his contract status without giving up any of their big three prospects, Andrew Painter, Aiden Miller, and Justin Crawford. That's really what I keep coming back to here, because the reliever market tilted heavily in favor of the sellers once Orioles closer Felix Bautista injured his shoulder and Guardians closer Emmanuel Clase was placed on leave as part of an ongoing investigation into sports betting. And when the week began, the Twins and A's were holding the best closers who weren't in their walk year, and both teams wanted Painter in any deal for Duran and Mason Miller. That was a non-starter for the Phillies, who wouldn't trade Painter at last year's deadline for even ace lefty Garrett Crochet. So as Dombrowski put it after making the deal for Duran, quote, "I really didn't think this one was possible a couple of days ago. Look, maybe Mick Abel will be a number 3 or 4 starter with the Twins, and maybe Eduardo Tait will turn into a starting catcher in the big leagues 3 or 4 years from now. But unless Duran gets hurt, he'll do more to help the Phillies win the World Series this year and in 2026 and 2027 too than Abel and certainly Tait, who won't even turn 19 for another few weeks. And nothing is more important to the Phillies than winning right now and maximizing their chances to keep winning through at least 2027, which happens to be the end of Zach Wheeler's contract. Duran fits neatly into that window and for a cost that wasn't terribly uncomfortable. Second, before we give Dombrowski any more flowers for the Duran deal, let's acknowledge why the Phillies needed bullpen help so much in the first place. Look, the Phillies didn't hit at home in Games 6 and 7 of the 2023 NLCS, but I can make a pretty good argument that that series was lost when the bullpen blew late leads in Games 3 and 4 in Arizona. And last year, the Phillies didn't play well in almost every facet of their divisional series against the Mets. But what if the bullpen doesn't melt down in Game 1 at home? Who knows? Maybe it's a different series. Despite all of that, the Phillies lost 2 relievers, Jeff Hoffman and Carlos Estevez, in free agency in the offseason and replaced them with only one, Jordan Romano. In fairness, they didn't expect Romano to struggle as much as he has, and they certainly couldn't have anticipated that Jose Alvarado would get popped for a PED suspension in May and miss 80 games plus be ineligible for the playoffs. But still, 1 + 1 has never equaled 1. And while the year-to-year volatility of relievers was as good a reason as any to not jump at multi-year deals for, let's say, Hoffman or Tanner Scott, the Phillies needed to do more than they did, especially considering their lack of reliever depth in AAA. If they'd made the 2-year commitment to Estevez that he got from the Royals, or if they splurged for Hoffman, or better yet, if they signed someone like Aroldis Chapman to the 1-year deal that he got from the Red Sox that has worked out so well, they wouldn't have needed to sacrifice their 5th and 6th best prospects at the trade deadline. But again, the acquisition cost for Duran could have been even greater than it was. Third, I'm sorry, but I can't help thinking the Phillies missed an opportunity by not trading for Eugenio Suarez. I know. Suarez was not a positional fit. He's a third baseman, and even though Alec Boehm is out now, he's expected back in only a few weeks from a fractured rib. And when Boehm comes back, where would Suarez play? There wasn't much appetite within the front office for putting Kyle Schwarber in left field to open up the DH spot, and it's hard to disagree. But I wrote this in the offseason, and I stand by it now. The Phillies should have taken up Bryce Harper up on his offer to move back to the outfield. Not forever, just for 2 months. Think about it. 2 months of Harper in left field, Boehm at first base, and Eugenio Suarez at third in order to have Suarez and his 36 home runs batting behind Schwarber and Harper in the middle of the order. Now, I talked to some scouts from other teams who described the Phillies farm system as lacking depth beyond the top 5 or 6 prospects. But it's not like the Mariners gave up a ton for Suarez. They traded 3 minor leaguers, including their number 14 and 25 prospects, according to Baseball America. Surely they could have put together a package of 3 equivalent players that would have satisfied the Diamondbacks. Suarez was the best hitter available at the deadline, and the Phillies did explore the idea. I'm just not sure they explored it enough. So they wound up with Harrison Bader, an excellent defender who's having his best year at the plate since probably 2021. We'll see if he winds up playing every day or only against lefties. I do think it opens the door for Justin Crawford to come up and play every day. Not unlike Andrew Benintendi on the 2016 Red Sox team that was run by Dombrowski. I wrote about that and how it relates to Crawford on Inquirer.com if you want to check that out. And finally, the way things played out at the trade deadline, it's going to be a fascinating 2 months in the National League East. Because after squaring off in the playoffs last year for the first time ever, the Phillies and Mets have been within 2 games of each other in the standings every day since June 15th. They're led by 2 of the most well-respected executives in the sport, Dombrowski and David Stearns. And they went into the deadline with strikingly similar needs, notably in the bullpen and the outfield, which means they pursued a lot of the same players. In the outfield, the Phillies went with Bader, the Mets with Cedric Mullins. but they filled their bullpen needs in totally different ways. The Mets struck early with a pre-deadline trade for Gregory Soto, and then acquired two relievers on Wednesday, Tyler Rogers from the Giants and Ryan Helsley from the Cardinals. In each case, Soto, Rogers, and Helsley, the Mets got a rental reliever, which meant that the total cost for those three relievers was only 8 players, 7 of whom are in the minor leagues, only 2 of whom were ranked among the Mets' top 10 prospects by Major League Baseball. And none were in the top 100 in the sport. Meanwhile, they kept their top 5 prospects, 4 of whom are top 100 guys: shortstop Chet Williams, pitchers Nolan McLean and Jonah Tong, and outfielder Carlos Benji, plus pitcher Brandon Sproat. The Phillies, meanwhile, well, they used John Middleton's money on a pre-deadline signing of 40-year-old reliever David Robertson, who was our guest on the show last week. Check that interview out if you have a chance. Then, even though they were interested in Helsley, they prioritized the additional year of control over Duran and gave up 2 of their top 6 prospects. Tait is in Baseball America's top 100 at number 50, and Abel was in that grouping before this season. So yes, both Stearns and Dombrowski are going for it. And maybe Duran will get the last out of a playoff series, maybe even against the Mets. But maybe Rogers and Helsley will outpitch Duran and Robertson over the next 2 months, and for a lower prospect cost. It's a dice roll, and when it comes to relievers, it's somehow even more random than that. But as I've said before, baseball around here is always more interesting when the Phillies and Mets are good at the same time. This year, they're 2 of the 3 or 4 best teams in the National League. They have 7 head-to-head matchups left. Circle the dates right now: August 25th, 26th, and 27th in New York, September 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th in Philly. It's going to be a photo finish in the NL East. All right, that'll do it for our trade deadline wrap-up. Let's move on now to Alumni Weekend at Citizens Bank Park and my sit-down with Phillies Wall of Fame catcher Mike Lieberthal. Mike Lieberthal, welcome to Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer. Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I do my own podcast from my backyard here, so this is like nothing new for me.
You sure do. You're like a pro here. You got the background, you got the ear pods, you're ready to go. And you know, you and I were just talking off camera. This is like a super busy time in our sport, as you know. It sort of started with the All-Star game a few weeks ago. We just had the Hall of Fame induction in Cooperstown with Dick Allen going into the Hall of Fame, and your former teammate Billy Wagner as well. It's trade deadline week, but it's also one of my favorite weekends of the year, and it's really upon us now, and that's Phillies Alumni Weekend at Citizens Bank Park. You're a Phillies Wall of Famer, class of 2012. You live on the West Coast, but I know you keep an eye on everything that's going on here. You co-host the Phillies Catch podcast, and we'll talk more about that. But I wonder, you know, what's the experience like for you, right, to come back every year to see former teammates and friends and just spend, you know, a few days around the ballpark in this environment again?
Yeah, it's always great to see ex-teammates that once you retire, everybody kind of goes different directions. So you don't really get to see, my friends like Chase Utley, Pat Burrell, Jimmy Rollins, players that you played all these years with, you spent every day in the clubhouse with, and then you retire and everybody goes different directions, different golf courses. I think that's the only time I get to see like Pat Burrell or Jimmy is it's in a golf tournament somewhere. So I never get to see these guys. It's great to come by, for 4 days and reminisce and just see guys that you don't see once you retire, like I said.
And you're bringing your whole family, or just about your whole family, with you. Your kids, your wife. How much do your kids? Because your oldest, I think, was born your last year with the Phillies, right? In 06. How much do they, pepper you with questions about your career and the guys you played with, or is it just like, whatever, Dad? You did this before we came around, and and everything's a little bit different now.
Yeah, my kids are 17. My boys are 17, 15, and almost 13. So 2 years apart. They've grown up watching the Phillies. Now that I'm doing the podcast, once a week or once every 2 weeks, I talk about the team. They are diehard Philly fans. Every day the Philly game is either on TV or they know the score. They have their favorite players. They are, when the Phillies come and play the Dodgers, we go to the Dodger game. they've just always been Philly fans, and it's just great. They're really excited to come this weekend. They don't get to come to Philly that often, so they're just, Dad, can we meet Trey Turner? Can we meet JT? Can we meet, Harper? It's just like, yeah, okay. I mean, I talked to Topper, and he said, yeah, you can bring him in the clubhouse and meet some of the guys. So they're really excited about that.
Oh, that's awesome. They'll have a great experience then this weekend with all of that. And I think the Phillies are going to have more than 50 alumni on hand this weekend. And your last year with the team, '06, happened to be my rookie year covering the Phillies for the Wilmington News Journal. And I really wanted to have you here this week because it's not only Wall of Fame weekend, but this Wall of Fame class is right in your wheelhouse, right? Like, you played for Ed Wade. In fact, he was the GM when you signed a couple of 3-year extensions, I think, with the Phillies. And you played with Jimmy Rollins. You were an all-star in 2000 when Jimmy came to the big leagues in September. And you had a front row seat as he developed into one of the game's best shortstops early in his career. Take it in any direction you want, but like, broadly speaking, when people say Jimmy Rollins, what do you think about from kind of being around him there for the first, half dozen or so years of his career?
Yeah, when Jimmy came up, he was like Larry Boa's little protege. It's always tough to find a shortstop, right? A minor league shortstop that, it's a tough position. And, to produce offensively, they said that we only need you for the glove. We don't need you for your offense. And Jimmy, did it all. I mean, Jimmy stole bases. He hit home runs. He hit for average. I mean, he was consistent in the field. He was Mr. Durability. I mean, every year he was putting up 600, over 600 at bats. It just seemed like the years I played with him, he never got hurt. You always counted on him at shortstop to make every play. He didn't make very many errors. He was very consistent, and it was kind of amazing when he, after 4 or 5 years, I think he popped 25 home runs one year and then 30 home runs the next year. And it was like, I mean, Jimmy, I knew you had power, but I didn't know you had 25, 30 home run power. Kind of, I think he loved, playing at the park, Citizens Bank. So, he was just a special player. I mean, like I said, he did it all. I mean, the doubles he hit, I think he hit like over 40 doubles, most of his career. And it was just a guy that can do it all and play defense. And a player like that doesn't come along very often, especially at shortstop.
So Doug Glanville, friend of yours, friend of our shows, he tells one of my favorite J-Roll stories that I've heard. And, Jimmy was a rookie. It was, I guess, 2001 in that case. And but he was hitting in a batting practice group with Doug, Bobby Abreu, and Scott Rowland. And Jimmy, right? Always talking, oozing with confidence, even then. And he's just a chatterbox in BP. Ooh, did you see that swing? Look at the backspin on that one. And finally, Rowland just had it. Like, and Scott, old school, super serious, focused, and all that. And he kind of gets Bobby and Doug together, and he says, "I'm going to kick Jimmy out of our group." And he wasn't asking so much as he was just giving them a heads up. Like, just so you know, like, I'm booting him.
He's talking too much.
Yeah, he's talking too much. Like, just, be quiet. Like rookies should be, back then, like, don't speak unless you're spoken to. So they don't really stand in his way. And Rowland kicks Jimmy out of the group. And for like a day, Doug's like, Jimmy's just down in the dumps, like he's sitting in the corner of the dugout, and he's kind of bummed out. But Jimmy being Jimmy, doesn't lose that confidence or that swagger or that strut. And pretty soon, he's back to being Jimmy, Jimmy being Jimmy and the guy that we all knew. What do you remember about Jimmy, the young guy, kind of just getting his feet wet and kind of, because he never struck me as, a wallflower or a guy who was shy or who was going to hesitate to kind of mix it up, even when he was a younger guy.
Yeah, Jimmy always had swagger, and it seems like every young player kind of has that swagger, which is great in today's day. They don't put pressure on themselves. They kind of just let the game come to them, and it just seems like you see so many more young players doing so well. I mean, you look at the two guys on the Nationals, they kind of got that easygoing swagger, confidence, and it can only help a young player have that confidence coming up. You don't have veteran players anymore, kind of like, hey, just stay in the corner. yeah, we don't want to hear from you. You're a rookie. It's just kind of you're accepted right away. They want you to play loose. And just, most of the players in the big leagues they're playing loose, they're having fun, and that's, when your talent can really shine, especially in pressure situations, especially in playoffs and World Series. And, we saw how well Jimmy did in those pressure situations. It just seemed like it was like spring training game every day for Jimmy. And that's when you can get the most out of your talent when you are young and you're coming up. And it was great to see. I mean, from day one, it was funny because Larry Boa, like I said, you're like, oh no, Larry's got him. Larry's going to go crazy with this confident young pup. And Jimmy loved him. I mean, it was just a great connection from the get go, getting that kind of mentorship from Larry, being that ex shortstop for so many years. I think that really helped Jimmy in the early years. So it was just, Jimmy was that special, like I said, nonchalant, having a good time. It was just, tough to get under Jimmy's skin, but I guess Roland did. And batting practice
Or
kicking
vice
him
versa.
out.
Vice
Yeah,
versa.
yeah.
I think, yeah. Jimmy makes the All-Star team early in his career. He ends the '05 season with that 36-game hitting streak that he carried into the next year. You guys barely missed the playoffs in '05. I wonder if that's kind of when you were able to see it start coming together for Jimmy as like maybe the leader or a leader of this core that could potentially go on and do some special things.
Yeah, you saw the core coming up with Ryan Howard and Chase Utley and Cole Hamels and really a special group of players that Ed Wade put together. And it was just a matter of getting the pitching, getting a couple more pieces with Cliff Lee and Roy Halladay. Like I said, pitching kind of carries you through the playoffs. It's really the most important factor really going into any team going into playoffs is having three good starters. And that's one thing the Phillies did have to go along with their big core infield that they had. It was just, it was a special team that Ed put together. And Jimmy was a part of it through the rebuilding years, the losing years, to, the Phillies finally winning in 2008.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Ed because he's going to be honored as well this weekend, along with Jimmy being inducted into the Wall of Fame. And, unfortunately for Ed, right, missing the playoffs in '05 kind of marked the end of the road for him. They hired Pat Gillick and off they go in '07, '08, and '09. But you were kind of in the middle of it all during Ed's tenure, right? I mean, if you think back to 2000, guys lose 97 games and he trades Kurt Schilling in the middle of the year at the deadline. And a year later, you win 86 games and it's sort of like trending in the right direction. And then you think about signing Jim Thome before '03, moving into the new ballpark in '04, Pat Burrell, Jimmy Chase, Ryan Howard, all coming to the big leagues, sort of that young group of like the next core. And Ed really not giving in to what were, offers that he had during those years to trade any and all of those guys at a certain point. Him holding those guys and thinking, okay, we can build around these guys. They're not going to be trade chips. How much credit, right, do you think Ed deserves for kind of establishing the foundation for what came in '07, '08, and '09? And I wonder if you relate to Ed at all in that way, in the sense that like you were both there for the buildup and then had to watch from afar as it all kind of came to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, it was like Gillick said, Ed Wade's team. I mean, most of the pieces from that 2018 were because of the development, the signings through the Ed Wade era. And like I said, I mean, there were some guys that were upset. Roland probably left just because of Phillies weren't willing to spend to go to the next level. And it was mainly pitching, I think. I think we had the core defense that was out there. Kurt Schilling was frustrated. He left. He just felt like the team wasn't ready to win yet. They needed some more pieces, and finally the pieces did come after Ed Wade. It was the same with myself. After I retired, I mean, I was at the end of my career with injuries, but it was just it would have been nice to have Roy Halladay, Cliff Lee, Cole Hamels in that rotation going into the playoffs with that same core that I had in the field. But that's the way baseball is. It just, it's the way things turn. And it was great to see that 2018 guys that I played with for so many years, finally get that championship.
Yeah, I mean, you think about some of the teammates that you had during that time there. Hall of Famers like Jim Thome, Billy Wagner, You had Schill, you had Scott Rowland, you had another Hall of Famer, you had all of those guys who, like, if the puzzle pieces could have fit together along with the Chase, Jimmy, Howard, Hamels crew, it was all sort of like within a year of each other, and they all didn't necessarily line up at the same exact time in 04, 05, 06.
Right. It was just unfortunate that we didn't, have that run throughout those rebuilding years. It was tough. It was tough going into, August and September where you're kind of out of it and, you're just playing for yourself and stats. And it seemed like every year it was like the Braves. The Braves won, what was it, 10 years in a row. Didn't have as many wild card, I guess, chances. I think there was like maybe one or two wild cards that were able to get into the playoffs. So it was unfortunate to have the Braves, in your division. And that's what happens with, a lot of teams. I mean, you look at Mike Trout. Mike Trout has just kind of been with the Angels, who haven't been able to make that jump to fill in the extra pieces for them to get into the playoffs. It just, it's been unfortunate for him to spend his whole career with the Angels and really not get to the World Series.
When I think about, your career, especially with the Phillies, I think about kind of your place in the franchise's catching lineage over the last 50 years. I mean, if you start with Bob Boone and you go through to Darren Daulton, to yourself, to Carlos Ruiz, now to JT Realmuto, like, the Phillies have had a pretty good catching line for the last 50 years. And for a while now, I've wanted to ask you about JT because, it feels like every year in the offseason and spring training, I write about the catcher aging curve as it relates to JT, right? And him being in his 30s now and this extreme workload that he carries behind the plate. He's 120, 130 game guy every year, and he's going to do it again this year. And I always look up catchers who started more than 100 games in a season in their 30s, and you come up on that list right through age 33. As a catcher, how difficult is it, or was it, for you to kind of maintain your body as you aged? And what do you think about when you watch JT and you watch what he's been able to do? He's going to be 35 next year, and he's still doing it year in, year out at that level with that workload.
Yeah. I mean, with JT being 34, 35, it doesn't seem like he's lost a step durability. He's been questioned about it. He feels great. He wants to be back there every day. There's no reason, even though with his age being 34, 35, he cannot extend his career another 4 years. His offensive numbers might go down. It seems like this year's power numbers are down, but he's been hot the last couple months. He's still hitting 274, and his throwout ratio is still the same. His pop times are still the same. His arm still looks good. His legs still look healthy. So there's no reason he cannot play the next 3 or 4 years. And I wouldn't be surprised if Phillies sign him for the next 2-3 years.
Yeah, that's where I was going to follow up with. I mean, you were atypical, right, for a catcher in that you signed a 3-year extension going into your age 32 season in 04. I'm sure you heard it. Like, I'm sure you heard the, how long can he continue to catch 100 plus games a year? How many years can we give him in his 30s? So you think that, JT being the athlete that he is, you mentioned plate collisions are not a thing anymore. He does the knee down thing in his catcher stance, which a lot of catchers do now, maybe saves a little bit of wear and tear on his knees. I've talked to him about that. So you think like JT's a guy who could, reasonably expect another 3 or maybe 4 year deal.
Definitely. He hasn't had many injuries. I had so many injuries and surgeries in my career, from my pelvis to different 4 or 5 knee surgeries. It's different when you've had those injuries and it's going to catch up to you. JT's really stayed injury-free his whole career. He's strong. He's healthy. There's no reason he can't play for the next 3-4 years.
Do you know him well? I mean,
I spent spring training for like 2 weeks. So a couple years ago. So that's when I got to meet most of the players and hang around JT for a little while. He's very, very serious guy. He's a family guy. He takes care of his body, takes care of himself, which is good to see.
Yeah. All right. Let me get you out of here with 2 quick ones. First, I'm curious, how often do you get asked about the Mike Lieberthal bobblehead in the background of The Office in certain episodes? Is that something that comes up? Because I always wondered why Mike Lieberthal, why they chose that, and if you know, and how often you get asked about it.
Yeah, well, my friends my boys' friends that come over all the time, they've never even seen The Office.
Right.
My kid will like let them know, yeah, my dad's, bobblehead is on Dwight's desk in the office. And they're like, The Office?
Right.
What is that? So I got to kind of ask kind of my age, and they know what I'm talking about a little bit. And I have like clips from, tapes that I have that on Dwight's desk, and they put it in the vending machine and they clean out his desk. And that was kind of a classic episode. And they show the bobblehead, but it was a Scranton bobblehead.
Okay.
I didn't even know that they were putting my bobblehead on the show. I didn't know until somebody told me that my bobblehead was on the show. So, being Michael Scott was the lead character in The Office. Right. My middle name is Scott. So Michael Scott Lieberthal was based out of Scranton. So they, some writer there was probably like, hey, I got a Michael Scott Lieberthal bobblehead, Scranton bobblehead. This should be perfect for Dwight's desk. But no residuals. Even if I had residuals, it'd probably be like 10 cents a week I would probably collect. But
I was going to say, you got to get on that, right? Because how often,
right?
like, every time you turn on the TV, there's an episode of The Office on somewhere. So
I know. I didn't get 1 cent for that, and no one ever even let me know. So I got to make a call somehow.
And you mentioned you co-host your own podcast, Phillies Catch. Tell me a little bit about why that's something that appealed to you to want to do. And look, I know you've got a big family at home and lots of pickups and lots of drop-offs, but did you ever say, well, hey, I wonder if a career in media would be something that I'd be interested in, whether it's calling games or just working in the media field beyond your podcast?
Yeah, it would. I mean, I tried out for Fox Sports over here in LA, obviously going to Philadelphia with 6 kids or traveling around on ESPN on the East Coast would be a little hard for me. And obviously working for a team would be kind of difficult with all these kids running around. But the podcast is easy. You can do from home. Seems like the podcast generation kind of started 4 or 5 years ago through the COVID years. And now it seems like everyone does a podcast. I mean, you need I think 2 million followers to even make money on it. I'm not trying to make money on it, but it keeps me in the game. It keeps me talking about the Phillies. I love watching games, keeps me in Major League Baseball. So, maybe in the future when my kids get a little older, I'll be ready for a media job somewhere. But, for now, I'm just kind of doing it for fun. I love, like I said, talking about the Phillies, following the Phillies daily. It's a passion of mine. I love looking at stats every day for not just the Phillies, every team. So it's just, I'm just kind of having fun with it, doing it like once a week, once every 2 weeks, talk about the team. And it just kind of keeps me up to the game.
Well, it's Phillies Catch, and it is a fun listen every time you guys do drop a new one. And you can find it everywhere that you can find Phillies Extra, Spotify, Apple, and all of those things as well. So great job with that, and best of luck on it continuing. Mike, this was a lot of fun, and I know it's going to be a blast this weekend for you, your family, all your former teammates at Citizens Bank Park. Safe travels. Have a great time. Enjoy it. I'm sure that I will see you there as well and say hello. So again, thank you for being with us and spending some of your time at Phillies Extra from the Philadelphia Inquirer.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and looking forward to seeing you in Philly.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. It's time for Hit and Run, where we take a question from you out there. A reminder, you can submit a question by email at slauber@inquirer.com or on the social media platform of your choice. X, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, Threads, LinkedIn. You name it, I'm there. So feel free to fire off a question or a comment. Lots of questions this week about the trade deadline and lots of questions about Justin Crawford. I'm going to take 2 of them because they're related. One is from Charles at SCK8182 on X, who somewhat frustratingly writes, why do the Phillies refuse to bring up Painter and Crawford? It's beyond a joke right now. If you're not going to play them, trade them. And from Will Kerr at Coach Will Kerr on X, why aren't the Phillies willing to commit full-time to Justin Crawford? I don't see how much playing time they can keep giving Max Kepler. Dave Dombrowski's response in his presser after the trade deadline didn't make any sense. All right. Thank you both for the question. I'll take Charles's first because I think, and I'll take the first part of his. I think it's two different situations with Painter and Crawford. Painter didn't pitch for 2 seasons because of the torn ligament in his elbow and the eventual Tommy John surgery. And I think what you're seeing, and really what the Phillies are seeing, is that he's still making up for the lost time, right? I mean, his command has come and gone from start to start, and sometimes even within starts. He just hasn't been as crisp in AAA as maybe they expected he would be, given how he dominated in the Arizona Fall League and the first few weeks of the season at Low A Clearwater. So he's continuing to pitch in Lehigh Valley, and really the additional time there, it's not going to hurt him, especially because the Phillies have gotten such strong performance and good health from their major league starters. When they need him, Painter will be there and he'll be ready. With Crawford, and I think you both hit on this, it's a little different. He's batting .325. He's getting on base at a .411 clip in AAA. He's getting tons of hits, even if they aren't extra base hits. You know, Crawford is polarizing with scouts because he hits so many balls on the ground. It seems to bother the Phillies less than a lot of teams because they see the speed and the contact ability, and they believe that he can be an effective hitter at the major league level no matter what, whether he hits it on the ground or in the air. The big thing, it seems, is playing time. Until they can guarantee that he will have an opportunity to play every day in the majors, he's going to stay in AAA. And they can't guarantee that he'll have that opportunity until a spot opens up. Maybe they do end up cutting ties with Max Kepler at some point soon. Maybe not. I kind of thought, as I mentioned in the first segment, that they do what they did with, what the Red Sox did under Dombrowski in 2016 with Andrew Benintendi, where they called him up the day after the trade deadline. I don't think that's going to happen here. You're not going to see Crawford on Friday, but you might see him sooner than later because he's definitely pushing on the door, and it's getting increasingly difficult for the Phillies to ignore. All right, let's leave it there and tell you that every episode, all 25 now of Phillies Extra, are available at inquirer.com/inquirer-live-sports or on the Inquirer's YouTube page or on Facebook. You can also listen to this episode and others, beginning with our Bryce Harper interview from a while back on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And while you're there, please give us a review, follow, rate, review, all of that stuff. It really does help us. Thanks again to my guest, Phillies Wall of Fame catcher Mike Lieberthal, and thank you to our producer, Angelica Irizarry, especially this week with the craziness of the trade deadline, for helping us put this together and keep everything running so smoothly. Until next week, thanks so much for listening, watching, and of course for reading the Philadelphia Inquirer.